UK and how I think it has gone astray. Don't get me wrong, it ain't all bad. I love the crazy fads, like England always buggering up. But you know we're gonna win the World Cup. I'm gonna start my own nation with myself for reservation. I'm gonna start my own nation with myself for reservation.
Keep the red flag flying here.
No.
No. Oh no, we'll have to find out if our viewers can hear anything.
Well,
We can
I
hear
can see
each
us on
other, but not
YouTube.
the...
Okay, well, we're live now, so.
Hello, everyone. It's lovely to see you. The apologies for the start. We're experiencing, as you may have guessed, significant internet issues. We're all jerky and we keep dropping out and coming back in, and and the thing's just not working properly. It's being very naughty indeed. Just to chatter for a little while, I normally start off, don't I, with a crazy silly thing, and I'm just usually some kind of allusion to a Radio 4 radio program, and this weak joke which accompanies it, and I had one ready today because I've got to make an apology, because last week, instead of calling the Secretary of State for Education Nick Gibb, I called him Neil Gibb. And this caused Neil Terry to get muddled up with another Neil, a real Neil Gibb, who ran Indie Fest in Bradford. And we got our knickers in a right twist in the middle of last week, and it was all my fault. So I have to apologise to Neil Terry, who I led astray awfully, and to the two Gibbs. And I had this kind of weak joke about they shouldn't have left the Bee Gees, and it was pathetic, really. But I have to say that it was all just laid on one side because I've just been watching the news about the earthquake in Turkey. And it just reduced me to tears. I don't know about you. It was just the most tragic event. And so I'd like to start this week, instead of being daft, by just sort of my heart aching for those poor people over there. And I'd love to give some money, and I think many of us will be in the same, but you don't know who to give money to because so much of it just goes astray. Now, it doesn't go to the people you're actually giving it for. So if you're listening to this and you know a charity that we can trust, pop it in the chat for us, really, please, and we'll see if our little gifts can do something about it. Just awful. That's it. Other than that, welcome to my three guests today. Paul Daly, it says on my screen, is looking much more feminine today, and decidedly like his wife Laura. Hi, Laura, good to see you.
Hello.
Jane Strange, who is rapidly becoming the hero of the left in England, is with us today. It's a great privilege to welcome you, Jane. And today, our token male is Mark Lungley. Welcome, Mark. You are so good to see you. And I'm going to give you a hard time over Liz Truss later on in the program. So, and time we moved on. Is that it? Thank you. Moment of the week. Who are we going to start with? Mark, moment of your week.
Okay, well, obviously, I I could go with a number of different things. I got through a selection process for a national diabetes conference, which was pretty cool because it's done via ballot. But what I thought I'd do is about the actions there have been this week, with obviously the pseudo general strike on Wednesday. It wasn't a general strike; not everybody was off, but a lot of unions all came out together, and we had a great group of people in Queen Square in Wolverhampton, which I found such a great thing. And it's great to have Mish, friend of Socialist Think Tank. We had him on an Origin show a while ago, and I think he's been on a couple of Socialist Night Live speaking there quite well. He did a great speech. But also as well in the Midlands, they've used one of our towns to start putting up refugees, and it's actually in Staffordshire. And some people who know me will know I call Staffordshire the Blue Wall. And basically, they had a protest there, and South Staffordshire especially can be very right wing. But there was a lot of comrades who got up there and counter protested, and I think it's good to see civil protests showing that some of us do welcome refugees. I'm very aware of the quotes by the astronauts when they say they look down on the Earth from up in space and they can't see borders. Borders are a man-made thing in some ways. We need to remember that.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, absolutely. The refugee problem here has gone away slightly because of the weather, but it's going to crank up again, and we're going to have to start campaigning again. Jane, moment of your week.
So the moment of my week was an angry moment, as you might imagine. It was the Open Democracy, the media organisation, published the fact that when Rishi Sunak was Chancellor, he allowed, or under his chancellorship, a Russian oligarch who now is in charge of the Wagner Group, who are providing mercenary forces to Putin in the Ukraine and who have boasted some really brutal and horrific murders. He was allowed to bypass British sanctions so that he could shift away large sums of money to sue and silence a British journalist working for Open Democracy. So that's pretty disgusting. But I'm sure Sunak would tell you that it happened under a different prime minister, so he can't really comment.
So you must be difficult to live with, Jane, because you're always so angry about so many things. But thank God you are. We need people to stand up for what's right. Thank you so much. And finally, Laura, moment of your week.
Yeah, it's been really difficult this week because there's been so much that's been happening. There's a few that spring to mind, like the shooting at Epsom College, the development of the disappearance of Nicola Bulley, but I think those topics sort of deserve more than just a moment of the week. So it's between either the Happy Valley finale, which I hope we all watched, which was incredible.
Yeah, I did.
Oh, John, honestly, it was so good. And to have like an older woman be the lead on a show, it doesn't happen very much nowadays. So I was particularly pleased with that, and they absolutely blew me away. The whole cast was amazing. And also the BBC using a picture of Viola Davis when they were talking about Beyonce winning a Grammy. Yeah, they had a lot of complaints and a lot of people pointing that out as soon as possible, and they said, sorry, it didn't reach their usual standards. And I thought, well, it kind of does, doesn't it? This has happened more than once. You know, so yeah, that was a
Some
highlight
poor
or a low light, I
intern is
don't
getting
know.
it in the neck. So I've said some poor intern is getting it in the neck.
Absolutely.
Left them to find a picture. We've got some lovely ones here. Neil Terry's moment of the week was attending the annual Fisherman's Day service in Hull, but it coincided with a tragedy. Jacqueline Hemmings finding out today that the Tory government wanted to add the clause of giving the police the power to stop in church without suspicion at protests, defeated in the Lords. But beggars belief that they even thought of such a thing. They'll stop us altogether. We need to watch out for this. Tim Dredge has sorted out an earthquake appeal. It's the Oxfam. one. And yes, I happen now, I would trust that one. Everybody going on about Sarah Lancaster. I just found that too stressful to watch. I watched the first two series, but I couldn't bear to watch another series. It's just too stressful for me. Right now, I can't hear these jingles. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to, when it finishes, you're just going to have to sit and give me a big beaming smile or something. No, don't start.
Not yet.
Oh, a scowl.
Now it's time for the big story.
I heard that.
Hey.
It is time for the big story. And for the second week running, Jane on our Socialist Think Tank messenger chat has just absolutely had a rant, an extended rant about a topic. And the result is that it's this week's big story. And it's about prepayment meters. And I dare not do anything except just ask Jane to explain why she's so angry about it and give us her thoughts about it. Jane, tell us about prepayment meters.
Thank you. So, people have probably heard about the Times expose that's come out in the last week, where a Times reporter went undercover with a contractor working for British Gas, forcibly entering and breaking into people's homes to fit prepayment meters. And I know there's video footage and details of, I think, at least one particular house they went into, and it sounds very distressing. And there's details of the vulnerable state of other people whose homes that they went into whilst the reporter was with them. Sorry, I need to breathe because this really makes me so angry. So the CEO of Centrica, who owns British Gas, has come out and said this is awful, it's disgusting, it's not who they are, it's not who they want to be. So there's a lot to unpack here, but the big issue published an article back in July last year stating that 187,000 warrants had been given out just between January and June last year. That's nearly 200,000 warrants to force their way into people's homes and do this, highlighting the issues. People have been talking about this. The issue of prepayment meters has been raised in the House of Lords and Parliament, I think 450 times recently. And Ofgem have been, I think in October, also asked the energy companies to look into concerns that they weren't properly checking how vulnerable people are before they were doing this to them. So to claim that they had no idea this was happening really frustrates me. The other part of it that really frustrates me is that the idea that it's okay to do this to anyone, the idea that there's anyone who, when you take away their light, their warmth, their ability to keep food, to wash themselves, to have clean clothing, that you're not making them vulnerable, that there's anyone who deserves to be treated like that in a country this rich, where there's absolutely no economic need for anyone to be suffering like that, to have a scale of people who you think deserve basic human dignity and other people who don't tick the right boxes, so it's okay to degrade their humanity. And I thought back to the film I, Daniel Blake, and if you think back to that, watching that, the way that people are, the way a lot of people are, is that even should they have someone in their life who is able to and wants to help them, and many people have people who want to but aren't able to help them financially, but even if you do have someone, a lot of people won't speak out. They'll blame themselves, they'll feel humiliated, they'll deteriorate further, and their life will be damaged, sometimes beyond repair. It's a horrific thing to do to anyone, and I'm so angry at the idea that what they've done wrong here is that they've done it in slightly the wrong way, that the contractor was doing it in a way that wasn't right, because there's not a right way to do this. And there's a bit more about the warrants I wanted to speak about, because since July 2021, there have been 500,000 warrants issued for this to happen to people. Only 72 of those 500,000 have been refused by the courts. And in one case, a court in the northeast of the country is on record for having approved 496 warrants in 3 minutes and 51 seconds. So if you just think about how much attention they gave to each of those cases to see what those people's circumstances were, they did really well to read 496 warrants. in under 4 minutes, it would suggest to me that they're not even looking at these and they're just waving them through.
Yes.
So yeah, it made me angry. And then, sorry, John, I just wanted to make one more point on this because I read
Make as many points as you want, Jane. You just carry on. We're just lapping it up here.
Thank you. So 3,000 people a year die in this country already from the cold. The Citizens Advice Bureau last year said that they had more people contact them saying they weren't able to top up their energy meters than in the last 10 years combined. And that was before the prices going up again this year. And in France, the state-owned energy company EDF is not able to cut people's power off. They're only allowed to reduce it to a minimum to provide them with light and refrigeration. So in France, you get treated like a human being. In this country, you don't get treated like a human being.
That last point is a really interesting one, because I was going to quiz you further. I mean, you started off by saying there's a lot to unpack in the numbers of warrants issued and in the denial by Chris O'Shea. I suspect you might want to just add something about what you thought about him pretending that he didn't know anything about it and the role of British Gas in this. But you finished off by just basically saying there shouldn't be prepayment meters at all. And so let's just, I'm going to ask you something about that later on. But first of all, talk about Chris O'Shea, because I found that disgraceful, his comments. Talk to me a bit about that, what you felt about Chris O'Shea.
So he sounded very genuine, didn't he? He's really disgusted at what had happened. But what they're doing, as I say, I don't think there is a nice way to do this to everyone, to anyone. What they're doing is potentially destroying people's lives. Anyone that they do this to is going to become very vulnerable. And he was also responsible for the fire and rehire tactics a year ago, and he didn't seem at that point to be too worried about what was happening to people's human rights in that situation. So it's difficult now. And it was also the contractor of Vato, who they're all too keen to. They might be disgusting, but they're doing a job they've been told to do by British Gas, and there's not a nice way to do this. And they did say that disconnecting residential domestic properties has only really kicked in for them about 5 or 6 years ago. Before that, they weren't really supposed to touch them, and that every single case is signed off by senior manager at British Gas was what they said.
I mean, this is the point I wanted you to make. That but also the other thing, we have this man sort of, and this is going to crop up people throughout the show today, beating their breasts and saying, well, I never knew about this. But you're paid hundreds of thousands of pounds a year to know about those things. Either say I knew about them and I turned a blind eye, I'm a bastard, or say I didn't know, I was failed at my job, I'll resign. But you can't say, oh, well, I didn't know these rotters doing this without me knowing. I don't believe him for a start. But even if it's true, it's incompetence. And people are suffering as a result. I got cross with that. But the other thing I wanted to just chase you on, and oh God, we're running out of time. Already, I wanted to chase you on was that you were sort of basically saying that there is no justification for prepayment meters at all, and I just wanted to quiz you, sort of. I mean, what are you going to do, therefore, with people who just won't pay, who just use the electricity and the gas and then say, well, come after me. You can't cut me off. I mean, how are you going to deal with what could become a very real problem at the lower end of the market?
Well, it seems to me that we weren't cutting many people off a few, 5 to 6 years ago. This problem's worsened. I mean, in France, they seem to cope. It hasn't sunk the whole country, letting people have enough light to live a basic standard of human dignity, and they're still standing. And how many people realistically are going to do that? I mean, enough to bankrupt us as a country, if that were even possible. It's
Not a company
So
that's making £23 billion profit. That's not British Gas, right? Right. Thank you very much. I'm going to come back to that later, and if I forget, remind me, because that's sort of I have something to say about that. Laura, do you agree with Jane? I mean, we have had that discussion, and there are certain benefits to certain people about prepayment meters, or is that just doesn't wash with you at all?
I agree with Jane on all things forever and always. But yeah, I mean, this whole conversation really does boil down to the fact that, it is the responsibility. Sorry, this doesn't happen when Paul's on the show. It's like kids and dogs just gravitate to me. It's the responsibility of the government to look after its citizens. And I think it is failing miserably on this in this respect. And it's a perfect example of how this country has just got it so wrong. They're putting profit and people's power and people's money above all else. That is what matters. And the fact, like you just said there, people might not pay the bills, and how do we tackle that? Well, that's sort of in keeping with the whole benefit street idea of things, and our government and the media have perpetuated that as a much bigger problem than it actually is, to sort of keep us where we belong. Again, as we've talked about so many times on this show, the government pointing the finger at convenient people whose fault all of this is, when actually they need to turn that finger around on themselves, because they're allowing energy companies, and I know we'll come on to this later, energy companies to make billions in profit while we're struggling to even keep the lights on. And it's absolutely pathetic that they can go, well, we're going to give you £66 a month towards your bills, so you've got no excuse. Well, I mean, how well is that advertised, and how easy is that to access? There's been a report come out this week about millions and millions of those vouchers haven't been claimed, and the people who haven't claimed them are the poorest in society. So it begs the question, why haven't they done it? Is it because they didn't know about it? Is it because they're not easy to cash in? I just think the reasons that people can't afford to pay these bills are the things that need to be looked at when we're looking at things like energy prices. And I watched a video the other day. It was just heartbreaking, of somebody who actually had to install these meters, and he'd gone into a house, and there was like sort of 4 kids, and these people just were on the bones of their backside. They had no money at all. And they put this meter in, and this guy was just devastated. He said, when I went into the house, it was warm, and by the time we left, it was freezing cold. And that's just like, imagine if that was your job. And of course, I'm all for people having jobs, trade unionists and all that, brilliant, but that can't be a lot of fun. And we've got to consider every aspect of this.
Jacqueline Hemmings has experience of prepayment meters, and can't justify being charged extra. I think that's an issue, that actually you pay more. I do see an argument whereby somebody might say, that I like a prepayment meter because I pay for what I'm using, and it helps me budget properly for it, and I can keep on top of my own money. But I think there's a very different kettle of fish to somebody coming in and fitting it, whether you like it or not, and you worrying how you're going to get the 50p to put it in. The other thing is that I don't know how somebody on a prepay meter, perhaps one of you know, how does somebody on a prepayment meter get the £67?
I think you have to apply for it, and it's kind of like you can you load it into your machine, because a lot of these things are no longer you feed them with cash. It's sort of like you get cards or something like that to top up the machine. Now, what a lot of people don't realise is a lot of these smart meters, they don't even need to come into your house now. They can literally just flick a switch and install the actual software to make your machine, your meter so you have to prepay for it. Yes, there are people who actually find that good, but also the reason is it's officially they cannot disconnect somebody like they used to back in the days, you know, when you were completely cut off. So what they talk about now is self-disconnecting. So if you can't feed the meter, yes, you have your emergency power, but you know, once that's used up, and I mean, I was reading a tweet that Jane put in our chat between the shows, and it was talking about how one family who got into somebody's house who killed themselves was kept on just feeding the meter, and they couldn't get it to. They kept on going to the shop and getting it. It's now done on apps, I believe, as well. You can use an app, and let's remember also Dave Clapton, who died in 2014 of diabetic ketoacidosis. My personal thought is he couldn't keep his insulin cool. The insulin he was injecting was just as good as water. Obviously, the coroner says there was no insulin in his body, but I wonder if that was it. Because if after insulin goes over 25 degrees on normally, it's that's it. It's no good.
Or Mark, when it freezes,
Yeah.
If you allow it to freeze, it's no good at all.
Yeah, when it goes to the back, and that can happen in the back of a fridge.
Yes, well, it can certainly happen if you leave it in the car overnight. I'm going to chunt for a little while here, and then I'm going to ask you another question, Mark. I have this year, as a pensioner, received £150 off my council tax and £300 heating allowance from the government and £400 in grants. So that's £850 the government has just given to me. And two things. First of all, I live frugally. I'm a single man living on my own in a nice warm house, basically in one room. That £850 is going to pay for my entire heating bill, not the increase in my bills, but my entire heating bills from November, probably through to the end of March, certainly nearly. And the second thing is that I actually could have afforded that it would have been a shock financially, but I could have afforded that £850 if they'd have just given us no help whatsoever. And sort of my question to you is this not the answer to Jane's issue? This is the thing I was saying I was going to bring up, Jane. That sort of what do we do about these people who can't afford to heat themselves? And it's the answer to whether we cut them off or not, or how we do it. The truth is that the help that the government is giving is being given to the wrong people. Mm-hmm. And millionaire MPs are getting the same help as some people who are down in the poorer end of society don't know how to claim or are choosing not to claim. And it ought to be means tested. And then in such a situation where the thing was properly organized, the government could actually afford to properly supply heat and light to the families that actually bloody well need it, and not wasting it on a whole swathe of population who could do without it, and in some cases just don't need it at all. And the answer is, why are they doing this? Because we are the people who vote. And the government is doing exactly with us what it did with Michelle Mone and all those other people. It's chucking money in their direction to buy their support, and a very inefficient way at all. And we'll come to this when we talk about Liz Truss as well. I mean, how would you, so that's how I'd solve the problem. How would you solve the problem of large numbers of people being unable to heat and light themselves properly this winter? What would be your solution?
Well, my thought is, everybody talked in 2019 about communist broadband, where everybody got a basic broadband. Why don't we do the same with power? Why don't we have a universal? Everybody gets that a basic allowance of power, and maybe so that you can heat your house and cook. Because let's remember, people in food banks, they have three different styles of parcel. They have the one for somebody who can cook, who's got a cooker that works, one for somebody who's got a kettle that they can turn on, and then finally a package for those who've got no power, so those who run out on the meters. So why not have just a basic level of power we all get paid through our taxes, in theory? Obviously we can talk modern monetary theory another time when Paul's around, but we all get that, because you talk about means testing. The argument would be they're means testing what you're giving them. What's being given is to what people would see as the deserving people, the frail old pensioners, and there are some who obviously, unlike yourself, who has a professional pension and things like that, who don't, like my grandparents. They never had private pensions or anything like that. They just relied on what the state gave them, which back in the 80s and early noughties was just about enough. Yeah. You see.
Thank you, Jane. Last word for you. At the moment, we deal with people who can't afford to heat and light themselves by the indignity of taking away their heating and lighting, and then saying that they've chosen that. What would your solution to this problem, which you've so brilliantly raised for us, be?
So I think we're kind of tacitly accepting that it's okay for the prices to be what they are, and it's absolutely not. So the company shouldn't have been allowed to put the prices up to this level when they're making these kind of profits. There needs to be a much higher windfall tax to take back from them what they've taken from us, and then that needs to be used to reduce bills down to a reasonable level. And we need storage facilities as a country to stop this hedging idiocy of having to buy, when prices are high, because we've got nowhere to store because we let Centrica close down the storage bit because that wasn't profitable. So, but I really like what Mark suggested too. I think nationalised utility companies and a basic level for everyone, so they don't need to worry about paying anything because it's funded through,
I think that makes sense. Some lovely comments here. Neil Terry points out that he worked in children's services and energy companies would contact them saying, we're going to cut them off and it's a child protection matter, you need to intervene, which would be a really good way if people did it properly. Jacqueline Hemmings wants a mechanism to make sure people never run out of energy. Neil Terry points out that some people struggle to get out of living off emergency energy. Too damn right, Neil. That's a marvellous point. Thank you. Neil Terry said, at least we know it will all be sorted out with Shaps in charge of it. The sarcasm runs heavy in that one. And citizen housing, says Jacqueline Hemmings. Building energy efficient bungalows in Coventry, and of course what they came up with after the Second World War was community heating, where the community piped heating into every house. Very briefly, Mark, I'm just about to run on.
I mean, one thing I was just going to talk about, if that's okay, is I saw a great film by a company called Patagonia, who talks about local cooperative energies, where they're like using the roofs of, say, community buildings like town halls and stuff, putting solar panels on them so that the community can dole out that energy. It's a great film. I tried to get it for into the West Midlands to play. I'm hoping that the Birmingham Cooperative Film Club will have it again. It's quite a good film. So I'll try to remember what it is. Sorry.
No, thank you. And we're moving on, Laura. Need that smile, Laura. No, too soon. Now, and we move on to our other stories in our inimitable political and muted manner. And not much time on either of these. Laura, talk to me about Shell.
Shell, congratulations, Shell. Highest profit in their whole 115 years of existence this year, £40 billion worth of profit, which I think runs on quite nicely from our last discussion about energy. This profit comes at a time when the rise in energy prices really are crippling people in this country, who just can't afford to pay household bills or get through the day, or, as Jane so eloquently put it, just, live life with a bit of dignity and be able to put the lights on and the heating on. There is a big argument over the windfall tax, and people are saying there needs to be a bigger windfall tax. Shell, expectedly are saying they've paid enough, they pay their dues, they pay what they're supposed to pay. But actually, in 2022, they paid 134 million under UK law. Previous to that, under EU law, it was 520 million. So clearly, they've got a cushy number out of the UK government there. And
I mean, just interrupting you there for 2 moments, they pay 75% tax. It's hard to, the issues are not how much tax they pay, it's what they pay the tax on, because so many of their income streams derive from overseas, that sort of, actually they pay a very decent level of and the other thing I'd like to point out is that I realize this sounds as though it's defending Shell, but the thing is that the level of their profits is not set by their corporate greed. It's because their prices are not linked to their extraction costs. Their prices are set by a kind of international cartel mechanism, which fixes the prices at the highest rate for everybody. And so this is very much a windfall profit for them, isn't it?
absolutely, yeah. But in the same vein, you've got places like France who have shown that you can put a cap on these price rises. It is possible. Our government have chosen not to do it. And
Again, interrupting you, that's because in France, the company which makes the electricity sells the electricity, EDF, and it's mainly government owned. Whereas in our country, the people who sell the electricity are different to the people who make the electricity. The people that sort of Shell does not supply energy to consumers, so it's much more difficult, isn't it? I mean, it's because our government has no energy policy and has fucked up its supply mechanisms in this. I mean, but nevertheless, it's not really Shell's fault.
Well, no, Shell are exploiting the system for all it's worth and are profiting off the back of it. Absolutely. And you've just highlighted the problem exactly there, John. It is complicated, and they've, as I say, they've exploited that. And the government haven't put anything in place to stop that being able to happen. In fact, I'd say they've perpetuated it. And in fact, as we're talking about governments, the opposition, the Labour Party, have said that they wouldn't, they'd stop the energy price cap going up in April. I'd argue that's nowhere near enough how we tackle this. We can't just go on as we are now. We've just highlighted in the last conversation we had how much of an issue this is, how problematic it is for people. And when we're not getting paid enough, people are out on strike because they don't have enough money. The cost of inflation is going up, so even those who do get pay rises, it's not keeping up with inflation, which is going through the roof. And yeah, we can say that Shell have paid their due. Shell, it's not their fault because they're following the rules that are set out by others. That's fine. But actually, I think those arguments tend to lose a bit of gravitas when you start looking at things like there are I think it's like 114,000 people now have put in a complaint about Shell from Nigeria, 2 villages in Nigeria where people are poisoned, they're dying, their farming, their fishing industry is completely obliterated because of the oil leaks from Shell's plants. Now, Shell have said, they've come out with as many excuses as they can. They've actually blamed organised gangs for siphoning off that oil. And it's their fault. That's what's caused the oil spillages. They've no intention of cleaning anything up. And then on top of that, they've now said, oh, not only is it not our fault, but actually it's Shell Production Distribution Company, which is a subsidiary of Shell, so it's not our fault either. And at some point there needs to be some blame, some
Accountability
over this problem, and stop blaming everybody else and raking in the billions, literally billions. It's scary. It really is.
Mark, the one of the things that Laura mentioned was the price cap, and the way that works is that the government is paying half of the cost of our electricity, and it's paying a third of the cost of the gas we use, and sort of that's before the grants. That's before we even charged, and it does that by pushing billions of taxpayers' money into the pockets of the energy suppliers, and that enable. Now, surely that is unsustainable. And in the end of the day, it's the British public who are paying. It's an illusion that it's reducing our prices, but surely it's unsustainable that the government long term should pay half of our electricity costs.
Surely it is, but it just shows how really rigged the market is. It's not a free market. Let's also, as Neil has said, another company's announced its profits. BP.
BP.
Does anybody know what BP stands for? British Petroleum. I think Jane may be a bit too young, but do you guys remember the sell-off of I
do indeed. Stupidest decision ever taken by any government ever in the world.
But they talk about free market, and obviously we'll talk about what Liz Truss was saying on that later. But if it was a free market, then surely they should let it rip. Why haven't they? Because they don't want what's happening in France. They don't want the city burning, and unfortunately, it's coming that way. If the Tories don't play ball soon, they're going to have to. I think we have to talk about the taxes, the way taxes work, and why can't Britain start and other countries, probably going to get the capitalist terrorist organisation that is the United States going against this, start saying, look, we need to change the way we charge prices for petrol and stuff. I liked what a friend of mine said once, which was, it was somebody on YouTube said, if companies have to increase their prices over 2% and the profits go up, then that should be incredibly taxed, 75%. Why not? We had a 92% tax rate on some people.
Laura, you're not muted, love.
Sorry, I've got dogs and babies all over the place. I'm like, can you stop?
I noticed my camera kept on sort of like freezing, so I hope I'm not disappearing on you. Yeah.
Last question, Jane, very quickly. One of the big criticisms of Shell is that they've reduced the amount that they're spending on green energy, and they've increased the amount they're spending on fossil fuels, and they've said this is necessary. I tend to agree. When we're all sat here, I bet all four of us are using gas for our central heating. The move away from gas is so huge, I can't see it happening quickly. Or what are your thoughts on that, Jane?
So I know that for BP, for every $1 they invest in low carbon, they're investing $26 in fossil fuels and giving $46 to shareholders. So that might be why the renewable energies aren't developing fast enough when you're when you're spending 26 times as much on the old fossil fuel energies and 46 times as much on shareholder profits. Of course, we're not going to have renewable energy. And bet any one of us here, if we had the choice, would be heating our house and lighting our houses with renewable energy. We wouldn't be touching gas if we had a choice about this, but we don't have a choice because companies like this make decisions that we don't agree with, but we have no control over, and they're the wrong decisions.
Thank you very much. You're my hero, Jane. Did you know that? That was perfect.
Thank you.
And the last question of all was that article by Liz Truss, and I'm going to get my head in my hands again, I think, because I was quite impressed by it. Mark, talk to me about Liz Truss and what she's been saying.
Oh, don't you think that sometimes you want to say to somebody, shut up, you've said enough, you've almost thrashed the economy. And because I was just thinking a few days ago, Liz Truss where's Liz Truss? We haven't heard. We've seen Boris Johnson in Parliament, but we ain't seen Liz Truss since she did her Margaret Thatcher out of Downing Street. But now she's come back and she's saying that the liberal left economic forums have had it in for her. I mean, I saw lots of people sent out memes saying,
Nobody expects
are the liberal left economic forums in the room with us now, like Liz Truss on a couch, like in a therapist studio, and also the one about sticking something in a bicycle wheel, and also a dog saying the liberal economic forum's knocked over the Christmas tree, and all that, which I found quite interesting. But it's sort of like, if you're going to meddle with such stuff, know what you're doing. She said,
hang on, I'm going to take you back one step though, because isn't that what we've been saying on the I know that we don't agree with her what she wants to do with the economy. She wants to take it right and free it up and give tax breaks. We want to take it left and control it much more closely. But nevertheless, we both come up against the social democratic economic system, which is the system of Cameron and Osborne and Starmer, damn it. And sort of, did some of the things that she was saying there about how that is built into the systems and it's obdurate and it won't move, did you not agree with some of those things?
It is quite interesting. I mean, one thing that is also, from a different point of view, there's been an article come out about the BBC, and it's that it doesn't do any journalism on such things. It was, one of the comments was about austerity, how it didn't question austerity, and that's probably, she is right in some ways on that. We don't question normal orthodoxy, that we don't question Blessing Margaret on her. Which, because she started it on the we're like that our economy is like a household budget. No, it's not, because we know a household doesn't have something like a sausage making machine where it can literally make money when it's running out.
The other thing that she said that on these same lines, which I agreed with, was that she says they set up the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, as an external organisation. Now, that is a member of the market establishment, and that comments on government plans. And one of the things it comments on is how much we've got to save to get the deficit how they want it to be. And then that constrains the government in its budget setting. Now, that's damn right. And what it is, that's putting a market-driven external body in control of the British government's budget-setting process. Now, surely she's right that this is absolutely horrific.
Yeah, she is in some ways with this. So we need to ask the question, why do we need to get the debt down? If we're getting the debt down, we are taking money from everybody else. It's not the same as a household budget. And maybe we have Liz Truss is becoming a comrade, but from the wrong side sometimes. Careful, the centrist horseshoe thing might be coming true, if you see what I mean.
I mean, the other thing I agreed with her is that if you think about it, Boris Johnson stole Labour centrists' clothes to win the last election with his talk of levelling up, and under the Tories, taxes have gone up to the highest they've been, much higher than they were under Blairite Labour. There is a kind of a centrist consensus and we get done over. I'm going to come to Jane next. The other thing that she was saying was that what she was doing was not bad. What she was doing, 60% of that mini budget that everybody just says was deluded and stupid was actually helping people with their energy bills, businesses as well as individuals. And to help industry, she cancelled the rise in national insurance and she cancelled the rise in corporation tax. And now, isn't that the kind of thing that if Labour left had got into power, they would have been doing to try and stop the economy going into recession? And her argument was that she was stopped from doing those things by international market forces that ate the heart out of her policies, didn't give them a chance. But in fact, they weren't wrong. I mean, I'm defending Liz Truss here. What's your response, Jane?
So I feel very conflicted about Liz Truss because we don't agree on our political outlook in any way. But I do think she understood where Rishi Sunak and his predecessor don't seem to understand, that these rising energy bills are crippling people, they're killing people. It's not okay, it's not sustainable. And she was going to do more to help people than Sunak was prepared to do, is prepared to do. I think to cut back his increase on national insurance, which was extremely ill thought out, to inflict upon, normal people, working class people at a cost of living crisis after 13 years of austerity. That was a terrible idea. And I don't think that Sunak of his own volition would have, or Hunt would have cancelled that. I think it was because of Liz Truss that they did. With the corporation tax, what I would say is that if she had only been going to cut corporation tax for small companies, I would have thought maybe that was a good idea, but to cut it for large companies seems unnecessary. And I took no pleasure in seeing Sunak and Hunt walk in like some sort of saviours, knowing that they are responsible for 13 years of hell in this country, destroying the NHS, the pain for austerity they've inflicted upon this country. And to scapegoat Liz Truss, whatever she may have done wrong, our economy was already ruined before she came in by their actions. And now they've come in as if they know better. And I see that they're using that as a mandate to inflict even more austerity on us. And it's not right.
What struck me about her talk was that she has no guile. She just tells the truth. I mean, she dropped herself in it time after time. You need to watch the interview, people. They say to her, but wasn't the 43 stopping the 45p tax, wasn't that political error? And she basically says, yes, I didn't realise people would be so cross. And then they get her on these liability-driven investments. And she says, oh, I didn't know about those. The person who was running the economy, she said, nobody told me about those. So, do you know how big they are? 60% of GDP. And nobody mentioned to me that they might go wrong. They were going wrong before I set the mini budget and nobody warned me. And you just think, well, my God, thank God you're not there anymore. But I mean, she's refreshingly open, and we have got like this in this country, that when we get a politician who doesn't lie to us, who's just open and human, we say, oh my God, got to get rid of them, they're deluded, they're mad. Bring back Boris with his lies. We can cope with that. Liz, last question to Laura, last question to you. Liz is my daughter-in-law, I'm so sorry. Last question to you. I saw in the Liz Truss episode a rerun of Corbyn, because what happened to Corbyn was that the membership said, we want this person and his policies to run our party and be our party's policies and our party's leader. And he went there, and the Parliamentary Labour Party said, oh, we don't like this man, he's horrible. We're going to do everything to get rid of him. And we're going to conspire with the establishment of the party and the officers of the party. And we're going to cause trouble and accuse him of stuff until he is destroyed. And what happened to Liz Truss was that the member, I mean, our policies are horrible, horrible. But the fact of the matter is that the people in the party said, this is the woman we want her policies, and they elected her the leader. And she went, and the Parliamentary Conservative Party conspired with the Treasury and with the international left-wing establishment, and brought her down. And I just saw a rerun of this. And what we have here, surely, I'm talking too much, this is your question, but what we have here, surely, Laura, is a situation where we have an establishment who's running things, and thou shalt not mess about with it. We are gaining from this, and this is how it continues. And that, surely, is what we here in Socialist Think Tank are fighting to destroy. Now, what do you react to that as a statement?
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think the scale's probably a little bit smaller. I mean, we saw the Labour Party establishment go to the ends of the earth to bring down Jeremy Corbyn. I don't think it took quite so much hard work to bring down Liz Truss.
No.
I think by putting her in, by getting her elected, I think there was an element of her being the sacrificial lamb. They needed somebody as a stopgap before the next person who could go, yeah, Boris was terrible, but wasn't she really, truly awful? The next person's going to be our knight in shining armour. And lo and behold, we have Rishi, who everybody, adores. And I watched the interview as well. I thought it was really interesting. You're right, she's very truthful in what she believes to be her truth. A lot of it's absolute rubbish. And you mentioned there about the LDI and the OBR, and it was very much like, I wasn't told about any of that, and it's not up to me, it's up to these people. And it very much throwing the blame and making excuses. And as somebody who's been on the receiving end of taking over some semblance of power when we took over our CLP, and not being handed the full information and not being given everything that you need in those handovers, it is frustrating and it is difficult. But I actually think it was set up that way. I don't think she was ever meant to be in power for quite so long. And she said, in that interview, that she will absolutely keep trying to win the argument to lower corporation tax, because paying high tax as we do now, she said, clearly doesn't work because our industry's not thriving. I think she's got that whole conversation wrong. She hasn't considered, perhaps if the richer people paid more tax and everybody else, just paid what their share, then we'd be in a better position because we'd have more disposable income to spend in our own economy, and the money would go around, and so on and so forth, as we've talked about loads on this show before. But yeah, she's a very interesting character. I did find it quite joyous to watch, I've got to admit.
It was interesting, and it certainly got me thinking more than some of the stuff from the establishment politicians who never tell you anything, really, do they? And that's the end of the programme. And no, I haven't got a crush on Liz Truss. Don't you dare try and say such a thing.
Yeah.
I do, however, have the most immense respect and gratitude for my guests today. Mark Lungley, you were wonderful. God bless. Thank you. Jane, sort of the rest of us will be getting jealous, and your head will be just going too big. You're just doing too well. Thank you so much. And Laura, not only commenting, but running the show and running the tech so seamlessly with that.
And dogs and poorly children.
Yeah. So in a politically unmuted way. And to our guests, God bless you. Thank you so much for your comments. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for being part of the team. We couldn't exist without you. Laura, do you want to say just those last few words of...
Yeah, why not?
The shop?
Why not? Thank you everyone for joining us again this Tuesday. We'll be back next week with more of the same. We need to bring Jane down a peg or two. She's far too good. She's far too clever. But no, if you're enjoying the shows, please do sign up to become a member of Socialist Think Tank. It is free, but by all means, if you do have an extra £1 or two, which I realise not many people do donate so that we can continue to make these shows for you. You can find us on Twitter, Twitch. We still have a Discord channel somewhere, YouTube, Facebook, everywhere. Go to our website and you can see hours and hours and hours worth of content, and it's all absolutely quality. So yes, we'll see you next week, and thank you very much.
God bless you. Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Keep the red flag flying here.